Hello and welcome to episode 51 of Creative Walks. My name is Pedro Bonatto, and if you are new to the show, first of all, welcome. And second, just a brief introduction about myself in case you are new to the show. And even if you are a listener for a while, it will be interesting just to recap this because it's very related to today's episode, and the subject for today's episode. So I am a photographer and a musician. Specifically, I am a fashion and fine art photographer, and I also am a drummer. I play Arabic drums, and that expanded into all sorts of world music and world percussion. And I created in Toronto a couple of years ago a world music and dance group called the Blue Dot Ensemble, where we try to find the connections between different cultures through music and dance and culture. In today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about this great thing that I did this year. It's nothing great on my end, it's great on the scientist's end who created these kinds of things, but it's basically the idea of exploring your heritage through DNA testing. If you are not familiar with companies like MyHeritage or the famous one, which is 23andMe, and there's a bunch of Ancestry.com, there's a bunch of companies that provide this kind of services. And basically what they do is, based on the Human Genome Project, which over the last, 20 years, they have mapped the DNA of humans, and one of the byproducts of it was that they were able to apply this not only to medicine, but also to the study of how migrations happened throughout the world on the last, 50 to 60,000 years. And they also were able to determine certain genetic characteristics of different populations. For example, if you are Northern European, you'll have a certain set of genes which are more prevalent in that area. Whereas if you are from Asia or if you are from America originally, you will have different aspects of your DNA, and they can sort of figure out which populations have a higher percentage of this kind of characteristics on their DNA. And what they do is you get basically a swap. It's basically this little kit that comes in the mail when you get the services from these companies, and basically you swap the insides of your cheeks with some saliva. You put it on this sort of like a cotton swipe, and you mail it to them, and they basically sequence your DNA. One of the extra services they are able to do is to gauge the risks of all sorts of diseases given the populations where you come from. I was not interested in that at the moment, but I was very interested for the last few years on what's your actual heritage? Because one of the things, as I was digging into what people have been finding out in these DNA tests, was that the heritage you think you have is very often not the heritage that your DNA shows that you actually have. Our family histories are usually so spotted, and we can't even come just a couple generations back, like your great-grandparents is already very obscure. And when you are the son or daughter of immigrants, it's even harder to gauge, because especially, say for example, I am 40, and then my grandparents' generation is from the 1920s and 1910s. And if you go even one generation back, it's when they were, for example, I was born in Brazil, they were basically coming in ships to the south of Brazil from all sorts of different countries, and they were colonizing and they were mixing together. And I was very curious to see what my heritage was. And so for this this past Christmas, I got one of those DNA tests, and I got my results a couple of weeks ago. And it was quite interesting. I'm not going to go in depth with my specific makeup. It's more about making a point about doing these kinds of tests. But basically, I knew that my family had Italians, Bonatto, like my name, then Castro, which is from Spain, and I know my father had some part German and or maybe Austrian, depending on when they left Europe. So that's sort of like what I thought was my makeup, right? And when I got my results, I thought it was so strange because there were certain characteristics that I had no idea were part of my true heritage. And they were specifically like, just to give you like just this little breakdown, which was 88% European heritage, then 6.4% African heritage, and 5.6% American heritage. And here I must say that what they mean by, for example, American is actually Native Americans and the Aboriginal peoples of South and Central America. So it's quite fascinating. But what was very strange that we saw, that we did not expect, was that there was about 25% of the heritage coming from Eastern Europe, from specifically the Balkan region. And that was very, very unexpected, because there is no stories in my family of people coming from those countries, like Serbia or Bosnia and all those places. So that was very strange. And the other one that was kind of interesting too was what they separated in terms of North and Western Europe, which was Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, which was a whopping 12%, which makes it bigger than my Italian heritage, which is 9%. And then there is one that is a North and Western European, which actually includes like France and Germany and a little bit of like south of the Scandinavian countries, and that's about 10% too. And then the other interesting thing that happened is that I saw that I had like apparently a significant like 4% makeup of North African and even Nigerian in 1%, and even like about almost 2% of Native Americans and 3.8% of Central and South Americans. So in the end, I ended up saying the percentages. That I'll actually include this on the show notes in case you want to check it out. But it's more about this idea that people have been falling in love with each other and having kids and mixing since the beginning of time. And sometimes we have this wrong notion that just because you think you are of a certain, let's say, blood line, that would be the thing that determines like, oh, I am an American, or I'm a Brazilian, or I'm a French guy, or like whatever you want to say. But what I find fascinating that this new DNA tests are revealing to the regular people is that we are this strange and interesting mix of populations from all around the world. And of course, some people will be, let's say, quote unquote, less mixed, and some people will be much more mixed. And they will be mixed in according to different characteristics depending on how these expansions and these migrations happened. And that's one of those things, especially in today's time, where it seems that it would be a natural thing that all the xenophobia or this love for country and identity in that sense would be falling apart, is actually getting increased in certain points. And I think these tests, especially these tests that get this fantastic view, and the scientific one, of where we come from, are basically destroying certain paradigms that we have about our identity. At least in these fake way of seeing things as if we are purely this or purely quote unquote that. What I found was interesting is that in my case, what I'll do with these tests, and I'm actually comparing with other companies that have slightly different methodologies in the way that they create these populations. So there is some inconsistencies. Whenever I took this the raw data from my DNA results, and I actually placed it in other companies that provide this kind of services, and they have like fairly similar makeup, but they have some inconsistencies. Like in another one that I saw called DNA.land, which is I think it's a non-profit organization, they actually put some Finnic and Norwegian, I think, heritage, and they put some Arabic and like specifically like Egyptian and Lebanese heritage there too. So sometimes there are probably some things that are a bit ambiguous, but as I was talking to my mother, for example, like where would this Native American heritage could come from? And she mentioned that apparently in my great-grandmother's side, one of her ancestors was actually an indigenous person. And then there is all this history that would account for this almost 5% of my DNA makeup would have come from the last couple of centuries in America. And what I thought was so interesting is how even in a couple of generations, we are so connected to the whole world. And if you come back even further in time, how much of our heritage is so mixed, and that's such a beautiful thing. And the other cool thing is that these tests, they are in the range of between $70 and $110. Usually you can find promotions to get them in any kind of special date like Mother's Day and all those things, or like Christmas. So there's always, if you want to do this, you can always take a look to see whenever they have those promotions. And I highly recommend you taking a look. It's very thrilling. It's a cool pastime. If you have a feel like $100 more, you can upgrade to this health profile that gives all sorts of interesting information about your makeup in terms of what your DNA can tell you. And that can even help with like kind of allergies to medications, what kind of genetic diseases or inherited diseases to take a look at, your propensity to get weight and all those things. So it's a quite marvelous thing for the price of like a couple of meals in North America in a nice restaurant. You can have the whole history of your DNA, like then it's all present in all cells in your body, hidden, this hidden history that connects you, I think, in a very real way to the history of the world, to the history of humanity. And I think that brings us a little bit more together. And that's why I was so fascinated by this prospect, not from the point of view of like, oh, my family is from this place or that place, although that's actually kind of interesting. But when you see this interesting breakdown of your heritage and how there will be some unexpected things there, and it activates your imagination when you think of all those people that have gone from one place to another, sometimes fleeing from a terrible place, sometimes going to a new life in a new place, and they sort of like become part of that land. And I think even in the current political climate where people are always talking, in my opinion, in a silly and misguided way of this idea of cultural appropriation and all those things, if you go and even if you believe in that aspect that you should be, let's say, stay in your lane culturally, which is absurd, I'll probably talk about this in more depth later, but your DNA shows at least you can wear the clothes of the people that were your like direct ancestors, right? So ancestors. So anyway, that's a bit more on the political end. I don't want to get into that like right now, but it's as a personal exploration, as what I mentioned on yesterday's episode, this idea of going on a vision quest. And if you are an artist, for example, you can probably like use this information to reinvent or at least revisit the stories that have been told about yourself and that you tell about yourself from a heritage point of view. And I think that's fascinating, and you should absolutely do it if you have this extra money to spend. So again, it's a very simple procedure to do. You get this package in the mail, you take the swipes of swap your inside of your cheeks and you send it in the mail to them, and they will show your results on the website. So with that, I will leave you for today, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. And again, if you like this show and if you are interested in the work that I do, you can take a look at my photography work and my music and my design and all the stuff that I'm working on my website, pedrobonatto.com. There's links to all of my things. If you like the show, I would appreciate if you would share with your friends, or if you can leave a review on iTunes or Google Play or Spotify or wherever you are listening to. I would really appreciate it. It will help to get the show to more people, more viewers, more people interested in creativity and exploring a more creative life. So with that, I'll leave you and I'll talk to you tomorrow.